Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this very special session, Parenting Out of Lockdown. My name is Zoe Sinclair, and I'm going to be your facilitator this evening. My day job is all about supporting people's mental health, so this event is of huge interest to me, and I'm being delighted to facilitate the session. As you can see, we are recording the session. There are many people that are interested in Suzette's talk tonight, and some people couldn't come. So we are recording it, but I want to assure you that when we send out the recording, it's going to be edited so no one's faces can be seen. So none of your audience can be seen, except for Suzette and my faces while we're speaking. So the lucky people viewing the recording will just be able to see us. So please don't worry that you will be seen on any video that will go out to the people that had registered for the event but can't make it. We couldn't start this evening without acknowledging the tragedy that occurred at JFS last week, and we send condolences to all the family. I'm sure you'll understand, though, that we won't be addressing this very tragic situation this evening. So tonight is all about how we parent our teenagers over the next few months and out of lockdown. And I am delighted to introduce you to our guest speaker, Suzette Shahmoon. Suzette is a psychologist at UCL Queen Square Institute of Neurology, a respected expert and speaker on parenting. And we really are delighted to have you this evening. So thank you, Suzette, for your time. Suzette is going to speak for about 20 minutes, and then we're going to be opening up to questions. We invite you to send questions through the chat box that you'll probably be able to see on your screen. So send them to me, the host. Totally understand that this can be a very sensitive area, and all these questions will be completely anonymous. We've also had quite a few questions in advance, so we assure you that if you've sent one of those in, we will be getting to them as well. And it is very much our intention to get to as many questions as possible, and we really urge you to send in anything that you would like. So, without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to hand over to Suzette.
Thank you so much, Zoe. It's wonderful to be here tonight to support my community, and thank you so much for inviting me to speak. As Zoe said, I'm a therapist, and I would say a good half of my practice is working with children and teens. And so what I'm going to be talking tonight is based on what I've been seeing in my therapy room. And please bear in mind that when I'm talking about the various issues after this whole year of lockdown hokey cokey, there is a spectrum out there on which most children will lie. Some kids will have will show issues in a more intense way, others not so much. So if this relates to anything I say relates to your child, but only a small amount, then do use my advice more moderately. You know, it's about being sensible with this. I obviously won't be able to touch on every issue because we don't have time, and also I won't be aware of every issue. But as Zoe said, we'll be taking your questions at the end of the session. I'll do my best to answer. So I'm going to start tonight by discussing the two main types of children that I've been seeing in my therapy room. The first being those who are afraid of lockdown ending. Now, we've spent a year telling our children that there's a killer virus out there and they need to stay away from people, they need to wash their hands, they need to stay home. And we've done a very good job of this. But our kids' brains are not as developed as ours. And that means that they actually don't process information in the same way as we do. So what I'm going to start by doing is give you a tiny little neurobiology lesson, because it will help you to understand your teens better. So our brains come in three parts. There is at the nape of the neck, the reptilian brain, and that deals with everything you don't have to think about. It deals with your breathing, heart rate, blood pressure. And then in the center of the brain is your limbic system. And your limbic system is where all of the information that we take in through our five senses, because that's how we experience the world, it all goes there first. So that's the center of the brain. It's the fastest processor on the planet. And what happens is all that information comes in and your brain cross-references against all of your memories, and it decides how you react in the moment. So I see a piece of chocolate cake, I'm instantly in love. I hear my child scream, I panic. Sometimes we will have very strong emotional responses, sometimes not much of a response to think about. But what happens is the moment we see, hear, taste, smell something, that information goes from our limbic system up to our cortex, okay? Now, our cortex is the crinkly part of the brain, the part that you see in photos, and that's all to do with thought. So I see a piece of cake, and now I have to think, do I want a big piece? Do I want a small piece? Then I start to think about the consequences. If I have a piece now, will it ruin my dinner? If my kids see me having a piece now, will they press me to have some, and will it ruin their dinner? So that consequence and future planning is dealt with by the part here of your brain, which is your prefrontal cortex. So that's how your brain works. And the most relevant and interesting thing that they don't tell us as parents is that that prefrontal cortex doesn't come fully online until your child is early 20s, which means that, you know, when you're telling your child off because they've done something stupid and you're like, you know, don't you understand? Don't you understand the implications of what you've done? Nope, they don't. And we don't realize this. And this is something we really need to take into account when we're parenting our children, because our children are not designed to think about the future in the way that we do. They are biologically designed to go out, make stupid mistakes, and learn from experience. And it's annoying. So our job as parents is to guide them, to put in place rules, boundaries, instill values, and warn them away from danger, because they don't really understand danger in the same way that we do. And we are primed to always look for danger as human beings. It's called the negativity bias. We always look for danger in the world because if we're aware of it, we can mitigate against it. So when we're parenting, what we do is we constantly enforce this story of be careful of this, be careful of that. And we tell our children over and over and over. In psychology, we call that rehearsal. When you say something more times, whatever you repeat sticks, it becomes permanent. It doesn't mean your child will listen to you. They still have their own minds. It's incredibly annoying, but the more you tell them, the more it sticks. So if we've been delivering this message of there is a killer virus, wash your hands, some kids have been really, really good at taking this message in, and they're not ready to let go of that message. And what we need to do is start drip feeding the message of the world is becoming a safer place. Because as I said, we're primed to always look for the negative in the world. We don't tend to tell our children they're safe. When they get in the car in the morning, you don't go, it's okay, I've been doing this for 20 years, you're safe. We don't constantly tell our children they're safe, but we do tell them, oh my God, this one's just learned to drive, call me when you get there, send me a text, make sure you put it on your belt. We're constantly priming them for threat. But at a time like this, we need to start priming them for safety. And some kids need a bit more evidence than others. And those are the kids who are the why kids, the ones who always tell you, you know, but why, mommy, but why? Those are the kids who you need to start giving them more information day on, day in, day out, from now until lockdown ends. So those are the kids who are afraid of lockdown ending. And then there are those who are raring to go. And I've had just a couple of these in my room. And to be honest, they're not really struggling about going out. They're struggling more about being let out. And that's more because the parents aren't ready to let them out. And this makes sense. Because if you think about it, our children have had pretty much a year's life experience taken from them. And so for a whole year, they haven't had that opportunity to go out and explore who they are and develop. And for a year, we as parents haven't had an opportunity to watch our children develop. And so some of these kids I'm finding starting to act out because they're trying to assert themselves and their parents are going, whoa, hold your horses. I know I said you could do this when you're 15, 16, 17, 18, but I'm not ready for you to do this because it's been a year and I'm not ready to trust you. I've put boundaries in place and you haven't proven yourself to me. And that's how parenting works, right? We put in place these boundaries, and the children then go off and they do something and they prove that they're trustworthy, and we relax and we give them a bit more control over their lives. Or they fight us because we're too controlling and we give them a bit more control over their lives. And there's this beautiful interplay between parent and child. Okay, not beautiful. Sometimes it's a real pain in the neck. It's hard and it's exhausting and it's constant negotiation, tiring. And there are days where I know I've regretted teaching my children to speak, but this is what parenting is about. You know, our kids haven't had the opportunity to prove themselves to us. And there's nothing wrong with explaining to your child that goalposts have changed. And yes, it's unfair, but we as parents are vulnerable. We're not infallible. We find it hard to let go. We're worried about danger. We see the future more than they do. We can predict consequence more than them. And so we're trying to protect them. And yes, it's frustrating, but the more you have those conversations with your child, the easier it is for them to, they won't like it. No teenager likes to hear that they can't do anything that they want to do, but at least there is that level of understanding, hopefully. So, as I said, I've got kids coming into me confused, complaining that they feel controlled. Talk to your children more than anything. It won't change things. They will still be annoyed, but it might temper them a little bit. They need to understand that the boundaries we put in place are not random. And then once lockdown ends, there are going to be some kids who want to be out all the time and some kids who don't want to be out. And at times this causes stress to parents. I've noticed this already now as kids have been going out for walks and not going out for walks. And some of these behaviors can be issues. They can be down to social anxiety. And social anxiety can play out in two ways. There is those kids who don't want to be seen, they don't want to go out, and others who are desperate to be out because they don't want to miss out and they want to be seen as part of the group. But sometimes we can misinterpret our children's behaviors. And I think some of that's down to personality and the way our brains respond to our environment. And what I'm talking about is introversion and extroversion. Now, there is a misconception in the world about what these personality traits are. Most people think introverts are the quiet people, extroverts are the loud people, and actually it's got nothing to do with that. It's all about arousal in the brain, to what extent your brain is working energetically. Introverts have very high levels of cortical arousal in their brain. That means that when they go out into the world, their brains are really, really wired. And so they're responding very, very quickly and to what's going on around them. And over a period of time, they get drained of energy, they get tired. Introverts can be the loudest people in the room, but after a couple of hours of being at a party, go home and lie under your duvet and recharge. That's a classic introvert. An extrovert, their brains are much more chill. On the contrary, they can take in so much more information without getting drained. On the contrary, they get charged because they have low levels of cortical arousal. And so if you've got, well, think about who you are as a person. I'm quite a high introvert. If I see someone once, 1 hour in a week, I'm done. My quota is done. Please let me go and hibernate. I have two kids who are high extroverts. I just sit and I look at them and I'm like, I don't understand. You saw people Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Don't you get tired? But the reality is they don't. And understanding who your child is, it's very, very important when we're parenting, particularly now, because I had one child who came to see me. She's a teenage girl, high extrovert, and her mother is a high introvert. And already her friends are making plans to go out and in groups of 6. And the child was saying, actually, no, I don't want to do this. I'm not ready to go out. And the mother was like, yeah, sure. Of course. Why would you? You saw someone 2 weeks ago. That's enough. Quota done. You know, for the mother, that's her natural way. But the dad is also an extrovert and he recognizes himself in his daughter. And he said, no, this isn't right. And they brought her to me and started talking to her. And she said, you know, I'm afraid to go out. I'm afraid of getting everything wrong. And as we started discussing what was going on in her head, she said, you know, well, I don't know who I am anymore. She's 13 years old. Last time she went out properly to her friends' houses, she was 12. She said, in that 1 year, my clothes don't fit. I know I need to buy new things. I don't know what the latest trends are. I don't know what my friends are wearing, and I'm scared to get it wrong. See, our kids develop over time. They learn new habits, they learn new behaviors thanks to the friends they're exposed to, the TV shows they watch, the influences that they follow. But the world's been static. And for some of them, they've got to now start working this stuff out for themselves. And it's quite daunting. Think about who you are as an individual. All of us in the good old days when we used to leave the house, you'd see someone wearing a pair of jeans and a top and you go, oh, I like that. And next thing you know, you get something similar, you incorporate it into your look and it's like, oh yeah, this is part of who I am now. Okay, well, we're a bit more solid. We've had more years life experience behind us than our kids. Some kids are working it out and they've had a year taken off. They don't know who they are. Be gentle with them. Talk to them. Some of them are flying blind. So this is the last point that I'm going to make before I hand back over to you, Zoe, is think back to what life was like for you when you were a teenager. I remember for me, and obviously I think there is a gender difference between men and women, but when I was a teenage girl, I couldn't wait to get home and call my friends, the friends who I'd spent all day with, and we would sit and we would talk about every single incident that happened at school, every conversation. We would go through it bit by bit. And what we did was we dissected our thoughts, our feelings, we listened to each other, we batted ideas around each other. And we started, by doing that, we processed what was going on for ourselves in our inner world. Our kids don't do that. And this predates COVID. Our kids are not talking to their friends in the same way. And I'm starting to notice this playing out in an interesting and slightly scary way in my therapy room, because I have a bunch of 12 to 22-year-olds who are struggling to describe what's going on inside of themselves. They're struggling to understand their thoughts, their feelings. They have very limited vocabularies when it comes to emotions. And if you don't have that language accessible to you, how do you make sense of yourself? Think about it. Don't you talk to yourself all day long? I know it's not just me. All of us do. We all talk to ourselves all day long. And we say, this wasn't very nice. I didn't like this. Oh, what's she thinking about me? But if our children are not talking to their friends in the way that they did, what do? They come home, they take a photo of themselves and they send it to their friends on Snapchat, or they write a post with a photo on Instagram and someone presses like. They're not having that discourse. Our kids are struggling to understand themselves. They're not building on that emotional vocabulary. So interact with your children more. If your children are struggling to go out, to not go out, if they are worried about what they're wearing, what they're not wearing, what their friends are doing, all of these issues, it's time to start opening up those conversations with your kids. And yes, at the beginning, they might not like it. Some kids don't. But as I said, when we were speaking to our friends would tell stories, and then that would make us understand ourselves. So tell your children stories, talk to them about, issues which you have. Don't make it too heavy. They're not there to be your therapists. They're not there to be your parents, but talk to them, make it okay, normalize their emotions, and then help them to understand that actually they're not alone. When you're in your problem state, okay, so if you're anxious, if you're nervous, whatever's going on, you always feel like you're the only one, no one else will understand you. And that's not true. Help them to understand themselves by telling stories about when you were anxious, when you were nervous, when you were worried about getting it wrong with what you wear or what you say. The more you do this, the more your children are prepared to go out into the world, not feeling like there's something wrong with them, but understanding that all the emotions they have are part of human experience. So I think that's pretty much where I'm going to leave it for now. Zoe, I know you have some questions for me.
Wonderful. Suzette, thank you so much. Just in that 15, 20 minutes, I think you've given so many of us an awful lot to think about. So thank you. So for some people that have just joined the call recently and may have missed my introduction, we're now going to have a little bit of a dialogue with Suzette, and she's going to look at some of the questions that are coming in. So please do feel free to send in a question. If they're coming in directly to me, I will keep them completely anonymous. So please take this opportunity to ask Suzette anything that you would like. So, Suzette, as I mentioned, we had quite a few questions as well coming in before the session, and there's just a few of them I'd really like to address, and they really tie in very nicely with everything you've been saying. So, one of the things that you were talking about was about, you know, for example, the rule of 6 that is now going to be coming in, and children going out into a garden in the next couple of weeks or whatever. So, the question posed was, in a world where the rule of 6 applies, the chances of being left out of something has just gone up. And it is visible, and it can also be visible on social media. How do we as parents help them manage that FOMO?
It's a really good question. I think there are two parts to it. I think the first one is we cannot protect our children from pain as much as we want to. And there are going to be times when our kids are going to experience things like social isolation. And we know there are fMRI studies which show that people, when they feel left out, it's actually the pain centers of the brain which light up. So when our children are left out of something, they're feeling physical pain, and that's horrendous to know that for our children. But the more you teach your children to manage feelings like this as children, the more they're going to manage this when they're older. And this is the perfect opportunity. There's a rule of 6, which means that, you know, if there were 7, 8, 9, or 10, they might have been included. This isn't personal to them. Already start depersonalizing things. We explain things to ourselves in our heads all day long. Oh, so-and-so didn't invite me. Maybe it's because she didn't like me as much. Oh, but it becomes personal. Don't let them personalize it. On the contrary, take it away from them and say, darling, it's not necessarily because they don't like you. Look at what's going on in the world. So already make it one step removed from them. So that's the first part, is helping them to manage their emotions by not letting it be too personal and helping them to become more resilient. The second thing is FOMO. FOMO comes from jealousy, right? Now we look at it's I want that. It's I want what they have. I want that experience that everybody else is having. I have a fear of missing out. Everyone else is having this experience. I don't want to miss it. Now, we look at negative emotions very often as if they're negative. They're not. They don't feel good, but they're not negative. What they're doing is they're telling you what's wrong for you, not going right for you. So if your child has FOMO, okay, good. Now we know what you want. You want to be out with a group of friends. Help them to be more proactive. Darling, what could you be doing in that hour, 2 hours when your friends are all out together? Is there someone else you could be calling? Because obviously this is something that you want. Or is it that particular group of friends? Maybe you can arrange to see 3 of them one day, 3 of them another day. So helping them to manage themselves, I think that's an incredibly important lesson for them just for when they're older.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Suzette. Another question, and there are quite a few questions coming in on this, so I'm sort of embracing all of these questions together, but is essentially about access to screens. During lockdown, all of us have been consumed by screens, children especially, spending more hours in their room on devices, and now we're trying to move them out of lockdown. Addiction, people are saying, to PlayStation, for example, has set in. How can we as parents navigate this and sort of wean our children off?
The $1 million question. Okay, so I think the first thing to do is, if you're talking about addiction to screens, is to understand how addiction works. Every time you engage with something that makes you feel good, that feel-good feeling comes from a release of a chemical called dopamine in your brain. So you receive a compliment, you get a hit of dopamine. You give a compliment, you get a hit of dopamine. You play a video game, you reach a new level, you get a hit of dopamine. Someone likes your Instagram post, same thing, okay? So our children are constantly receiving this reward in their brain, okay? The dopaminergic system is known as the reward system, the reward pathway. So over time, this can become addictive. The more you start receiving something which feels good, the more you want it. The brain starts to habituate. It gets used to certain levels of dopamine. And over time, it starts seeking out more. So the kids who don't want to get off the game because it feels good, they carry on playing. And what's really sad is I sat with a software designer once for video games. He's the story writer. And he said, actually, they brought in a bunch of neuroscientists into his company, and the neuroscientists explained to them how to activate that dopaminergic system. So people are actually purposefully trying to get our children addicted to their games. So what we need to do is not look so much at the behavior of the game playing, but what's driving it. Dopamine is a reward. So our kids are looking for rewards. They're seeking it on a screen because that's the easiest way to access it, right? So to change this, I mean, in an ideal world, you get this societal change where everybody stops their children playing on screens. But let's face it, this is how our children have been allowed to communicate over the past year, particularly boys with video games, I find. Okay, so we need to start making them feel more rewarded in the home. And this is not an easy task, okay? It is possible, but it's not easy. I've got a lot of teenage boys who've come to me and have said, I feel a bit invisible at home. When I come home or while I'm at home, all my parents do is they order me around. Have you done this? Have you done that? Are you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? Have you done this? Have you done that? And what they say is they're missing out on conversation. They don't connect properly with their parents. And in reality, let's face it, this has not been an easy year. You know, parents are working, they're running the house, cleaning the house, trying to get their kids through online school. Honestly, who has the energy to talk to their kids as well? You know, let's face it, it takes energy, it takes time, particularly for an introvert parent like me. You know, you don't really have the energy for it in the way that we used to. But there's a group of scientists out there who are looking at addiction, and the more they talk about it, the more they say addiction comes from a lack of connection in the world. And so the more you start to listen to your child, talk to them, validate their opinions, even if their opinions are wrong, listen to them and make them feel good about the fact that they have an opinion. You know, don't come down on them for it. Tell them they're doing really well by expressing themselves. You know, celebrate the fact that they have their own minds and then veer them towards the right thing. But all of that is going to help to release more dopamine in the brain. The more you get them to feed themselves with dopamine from you, the less, in theory, they should look for it in the outside world through screens.
Again, really useful tips, Suzette. Okay, so you have spoken quite rightly about that we should be trying to speak to our children and have open conversations with our children. So I'm referring to questions now that have been sent in. What if your child doesn't want to interact with you? After all, we're old. What do we know or understand? And following on from that, a similar question, what if we can't start a conversation with our teen?
I know, it's hard. I never said it was easy. I'm telling you what we should do, but how to do it, it's always going to be about trial and error, okay? Einstein said, you know, the definition of insanity is trying to do the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. If you are trying to initiate conversations with your child in the same way and not getting the same result, the result you want, change it up a bit. Look for different ways, bring other people into the conversation if you can, talk to them. You know, it is difficult. I'm not saying it's easy, but it doesn't mean you stop trying. I had one teenage boy who came in once, and he came and he was complaining about his parents. My parents don't want to talk to me. They never say everything I do is I'm wrong. And so he's always on his screen. And I said, okay, fine. I brought the parents in and I said, okay, what we need to do is start getting you dialoguing. And we set up tasks and they went off with their tasks and they came back the following week and kid didn't want to engage. Yeah, it's hard. And I brought it to his attention. He said, you know what? I don't really want to talk to my parents right now. And I'm like, okay, but do you want to have a better relationship? And sometimes it's, you know, be vulnerable with your kid and say, look, I just feel like we're not connecting and I want to have a better relationship with you. I am here for you. You know, just simple words like that can sometimes spark something in a child, because I'm 40, I still want my parents' validation. You know, most of us do. It's very rare that kids don't want that, but most kids want it on their terms. So open it up to them and say, you're older now. I want to start having more of a relationship with you, which is not just about parenting. I want to know who you are. I want to know about your opinions. And, you know, trust is a big thing. Kids need to be able to trust you as much as you trust them. A lot of kids don't trust talking to their parents because their parents will react and make them feel stupid, make them feel irrelevant. You know, be careful how you respond to whatever your child says. If your child says something outrageous, don't fly off the handle. Take it very slow, take it very gently. The more you do that, the easier it is for them to open up to you. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I want to thank everyone because we've got lots and lots of questions coming through. So some really interesting discussion ahead. So Suzette, to ask you, this is, I think a lot of people will empathise with this one. I'm keen to find a way to help my 16-year-old replace milestones missed and seize the freedom that hopefully lies ahead, not to control it, but to enable it. Would appreciate some advice.
It's a very good question. And it's, firstly, we parent according to us very often. Okay, it's natural. We think about what's important to us and we try and impose that on our children very often. Sometimes it's worth asking your child what's important to them. What are the milestones which they feel they've missed out on, which they would like to start working towards? That's a conversation you can have with them and say, you know, I'm aware that this has been a really rough year and you've missed out on so much. What have you missed out on that you want to start doing? Already open up that conversation and invite them to tell you what's important to them. And then after that, if they're missing things which you think are important, then say, okay, let me tell you about the things which I want you to have. And so you start opening it. Everything is about conversation with teenagers. You need to start opening up these conversations. And the more you do, the more you're inviting your child in to tell you what's important to them. And the more you tell them what's important to you. And you start, as I said, it's that interplay between parent and child. But never discount what's important to them and their experience. There is one of the things I always tell parents is, you know, we always say we want our kids to be individuals, but we don't. It's not true. Any parent who says that, I think they believe it, but it's not true. We want our kids to really be mini versions of us, because then we'll understand them and then we can keep them safe and then we can guide them to have the best jobs, the best partners, and the best lives. But our kids are individuals. And so as they grow, you need to start treating them as such. And the more you do that, the more they start to respond, has been my experience in the therapy room.
Yeah, absolutely. Just going back to that initial question we asked, sort of about the rule of six and FOMO. Mm-hmm. Somebody thought something really interesting. Why do some children just don't care about FOMO and not bothered if sometimes they've been left out? They have strong resilience and don't feel it's the end of the world if they're not invited to everything. So my question is, why do some kids have strong resilience and can deal with anything that comes their way? Is it from parenting? Is it different brains? Or what is it?
It's a really good question. Yeah, some of it is personality. Okay, some kids are just they have, Angela Duckworth calls it grit. They just have a little bit more grit and they're able to cope with these things. And as I said, it's the way we describe things to ourselves in our head. Some kids just don't personalize things and they're able to brush it off. Other kids do. And oh boy, when they do it, they do it. And it's about teaching them how to manage that. It's when you hear them making something. There is in the world of positive psychology, we talk about explanatory styles, and those kids who are more resilient are the ones who don't take difficult situations personally. Those kids who struggle are the ones who do. Those kids who don't struggle are the ones who don't make things they make things context dependent, whereas the kids who struggle don't. So for example, oh, it's raining today. It always rains on a day when it's important to me, when I've got to go out and do this and that. Okay, that's when you're making it quite context sparse, right? Whereas a resilient kid will be like, oh, it's raining today. Oh, well, doesn't matter. They make it context tight and go, well, tomorrow it won't rain when I've got this. They don't explain things to themselves in a way where it's all personal to them. And so as parents, our job is to start doing that for them and teaching them how to do that. But yeah, there are personality differences. Some kids are just better at it, and sometimes it's parenting, sometimes it's they've had a difficult time, they've had a particular event at school, someone said something. As I said, information comes into our brain, we cross-reference it and we react accordingly, and sometimes kids will react accordingly because they've had a past experience which was quite negative, and so it's just constantly reinforcing those positive messages to them.
Okay, great. Okay, so I've had a number of questions in about the role of dads. I'm going to read both of them out and you respond how you like. So the questions are, please can I ask if a dad has a specific and important role with teenage boys? Is there anything significant that a father can do, or is there any way that a father can specifically support or amplify a mother's role with a boy? So that's sort of part A. And B is, does Suzette have any specific tips for dads to connect with their teenage daughters?
Very good questions. So it's interesting that we're going into the gender differences now. And I find with gender differences that very often there is this belief that we talk about male energy and female energy. In the Eastern traditions, they talk about it yang energy and yin energy. And yin energy, female energy, is supposed to be soft and compassionate and kind and gentle. And male energy is supposed to be strong and, you know, it's feisty and aggressive. But the reality is that there is space for both in all genders. And I think for men, fathers, the best thing you can do is teach your child to be balanced, is to support your wife or your partner by coming across firstly as a united front in whatever you're telling your children. The hardest thing kids cope with is when they get one message from a mum and another message from the dad. So if you've got a mother who says, you know, someone beat you up, be kind, understand why they did this, and then the dad comes along and goes, no, beat the hell out of him. That's what you should do. It's confusing for a child. So firstly, work out your value system between you as parents, and then as parents, go off and instill those values in the same way. So for example, my values, our top values in my home is kindness, respect, equality. These are the things that we've tried to instill into our children. And whenever our kids come to us with an issue, that's what we come. Now, a father will instill that in a different way than a mother will, even though he's a little bit more aggressive or whatever. It's sticking to the value, go to the value system rather than anything else. As for tips to speaking to your daughter, little girls love their dads. Little girls want to know that their dads value them. And the best thing you can do for a girl is show her that you see her strength, her qualities, you know, listen to her. I think it doesn't matter whether you're a father or a mother. Talk to your children. The power we have as parents is in our storytelling. We connect through story. We make sense of our world through story. Whenever we wake up in the morning, we tell ourselves stories about what our day is going to be like, what we're going to do. We're storytellers. That's how we make sense of everything. When you're with your child, listen to what's going on and then relate back to them how you see them through a story, or how you understand what they've gone through because you've gone through something similar, and give them a story. It doesn't matter whether you're a mother or a father. All of you as parents, this is your duty to your child. Make them understand who they are and through your eyes. So as a father, yeah, celebrate who your daughter is, reinforce who she is, and be open and say, you know, as a father, I want to have a close relationship with you. You guide me. I think that's probably the most powerful thing a parent can do, is to go to their kid and say, I want to be a good parent. Tell me what I'm not doing for you. You guide me. Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So we're sort of going into, I suppose, the last 5 minutes of our questions. So if anyone else wants to send in, please do get one in quickly. Okay, this question I think is going to be relevant to so many people. Cancelled exams, been going on now, we're into our second year. Who knows what the future holds? How do our teenagers who are doing A-levels or GCSEs manage the stress of these constant assessments now that exams have been cancelled? How can we help our teens through this?
Badly. Speaking as a mother now, not a therapist, whose daughter is having stress nosebleeds every day because she's got A-levels, I think the first thing to do is to, particularly these exam kids, they got the short end of the stick this year, because last year everything was cancelled, and yes, they had stress because they didn't know what was going on. But this year what they were told was, oh, okay, so we're cancelling your exams, but the schools are now going to be grading you. And what I'm hearing from a lot of kids coming back at me is, so now every single day feels like an A-level or a GCSE, because every single day counts. And actually, that pressure is much too much, absolutely too much. And the only thing you can do to your child is firstly explain that that's a really bad way of looking at it, and it's a harmful way of looking at it, because it's not true. They've been working for 2 years. And this is actually the first time ever where those 2 years really count. Your schools are not just grading you based on one exam anymore. They're looking at everything that you've done over the past 2 years and bring that to your kids' attention, says the mother whose daughter's ignoring her. But it's all, as I said, all you can do is keep trying to reinforce this, the idea of safety. Our kids are wired for threat at the moment. Remember I spoke about that the limbic system and the cortex. When information comes in and we feel triggered by threat, what happens is actually the cortex doesn't communicate with the limbic system anymore. And the next thing you know is they go into a limbic response. We call it fight or flight. It means our kids start panicking. They either start fighting, or they run away, or they freeze. And all you can do is start to calm down that limbic response. That's the first thing you can do. Calm them down, take them out for a walk if they will listen to you. Do whatever you can to calm them down, and then start reinforcing this story of, this is not just about these next few weeks. The school are taking into account everything you've done. And don't worry, if you didn't do well over the past 2 years, they also know that the past 2 years have been messed up. They're taking everything into account, and all you can do is be your best. And your best, it's good enough for me, and it has to be good enough for you.
Yeah, very wise words. Thank you. So, Suzette, as we kind of pull all this together, you know, as parents, when we feel that things maybe aren't quite right, what's our next step? When do we know that things aren't quite right, and what should we be doing?
The first thing is speak to your teenager and ask them. Some teenagers will say, no, I'm fine. But actually, when you actually identify it in your teen, very often, those who are really struggling will cry out for help. And then seek help. Call a counsellor. There's loads. Call your GP if you're very worried. If you feel that your child is in imminent danger, call 999. Don't be afraid. At the end of the day, your child's security comes first. If you've got it wrong, it doesn't matter. Who cares? But do what you can. You can't make your child receive help. All you can do is facilitate the pathway to help. And so speaking to your child and recognizing that in them and saying, you know, I see you and I don't think you're behaving in the way that you normally behave, and I'm worried about you, and I do this because I love you. And so what I want to do is give you the opportunity, the resources to help yourself. And if you've ever felt low, if you've ever struggled, or someone you know close to you has struggled, again, share that with them, because most kids think they're weird or they're strange when they experience difficult emotions. And once you normalize it, you give them permission to deal with their issues. So I think that would be the way that I would handle it. Speak to them first, and then speak to a mental health professional or your GP.
Thank you, Suzette. That was going to sort of be my last question, but there's just one more that's come in that I'd really like to ask, if that's okay. And I think this is something also that many parents will empathise with. How do we balance allowing the teenager to make their own choices, finding themselves, experimenting, but at the same time letting them know our own limitations?
Oh, so hard. Okay, how do you
What a
do that?
great question.
Oh, it's a brilliant question. And I tell you something, anyone who finds the formula, you're going to do very well in life. Look, it's, as I said, it's that interplay between you and your child. If your child is reacting to what you do in the way you're parenting them, then you know that there is something that then they're not experiencing the way you parent them in a good way. And I'm not saying that because they don't know, they don't understand consequence. There are going to be some things which your children don't like and things that you put in place and honestly tough. But there are going to be times when you're going to have to give as well. And it really is give and take. It's talking to your child as much as possible, explaining to them, you know, what it is, what you need from them to be able to trust them so that you can help them go out on their way and be supportive of that, but also allowing them to speak to you and tell you what it is in you that they don't trust so that they can have that open dialogue. And finding that balance, honestly, there's no magic to it. It's a constant negotiation between you and your child. It's just, remember, your child is an individual and you're going to instill certain values in them and they're going to pick and choose. They're going to say, yep, this is for me, this is not. And it's going to be really hard for you as a parent to watch that as it happens. But they are individuals and eventually they are going to go off into the world. And so you need to pick your battles wisely. When they decide, you know, this, no, decide, is that really the most important thing fundamentally to who you are as a family? Because if it's not, let it go maybe and focus on the other things instead.
Suzette, thank you. I feel I could carry on talking to you all night, but I can't thank you enough for being with us this evening, and also really to thank the audience for all the really great questions.
Thank you. I have to tell you, on a personal note, I've learned so much. And Suzette, if I dare say, I would never ever believe you an introvert. You've got such beautiful clarity and social skills, and your messages are just so clear. It's just beautiful to listen to you. Really wonderful. Thank you so much. I just want to quickly say a couple of things as a fellow parent and also from my experience with teenagers. And that's the importance of validating. I think as parents especially, we want to make things better. We don't want our children to have pain, and we try to naturally rescue them and to try and find a way for them to feel better. But I found that there is a real strength in actually being able to sit with the pain and with the difficulty and being able to empathize. So instead of trying to say to your child, it's okay, you don't even want to go out with so-and-so, and you don't, you know, perhaps going back to that feeling of, you know, that must be so painful, that must be so horrible. And I think, especially personally for me, that was something which I found very hard because I naturally just, I want to make things better. So as a fellow parent, I just felt I just wanted to share that idea, which I think really, really helps with teenagers. And also the idea of constantly working on their self-esteem. Because, you know, if they have self-esteem, then it's okay if I'm not the best, and it's okay if I'm not the most popular, etc. And we all have so much peer pressure. It's something that even as adults, we don't grow out of. And just to really, really find that quality time, it's priceless. You know, at the end of the day, we just all want to just chill, relax, perhaps go on our phones. And just like we're telling them about their screen time, you know, we have to look at our own screen times, myself included. And if they see that we're putting our phone away and we're concentrating and we're listening and we're really hearing them, I feel that the doors of communication are so much easier. So that's my just little snippet that I wanted to share with you. And I also wanted to just tell you all that I'm here to signpost you. If you feel you're struggling, if your child's struggling, if you want to know where would be a good direction, what help you might need, please, please never ever suffer in silence. And we've got wonderful people we can help you to and to guide you with. And I've even got my good friend Julia Alberga, who's very into the mental well-being, who will also help me to advise when you feel your child is struggling. I know I'm not meant to be saying the official thank yous, but I will just say that I've gained so much, and I'd like now to pass over to my very esteemed colleague, Rabbi Guten Tag.
Thank you, Rochela, and thank you, Suzette and Zoe, for tonight. It's great to see so many of you here. And the only thing I want to say is that, please remember that I'm here. I do speak to a lot of the teenagers in the community, and I'm always at the other end of a phone call to speak to the parents. You're not alone. We've all got challenges. It's been hard for everybody. And I want you to know that we're here for you, and where appropriate, we will be able to signpost you to the right place and hold your hand metaphorically along the way, one day physically as well. That would be lovely. But meanwhile, thank you all for joining, and call me.
Thank you, Rabbi Guten Tag. Thank you all for joining us this evening. It was really something special to see you all here. Suzette, there's amazing, amazing words, insightful tips, and really special, something you left us with. So thank you very much. Thank you. I want to thank the committee. This could not have been done without this amazing committee that came together with Zoe St. Clair, David Grossman, the male token of the committee here. We have Catherine Isaacs, Jane Elbaz, Sarah Franks, Tanya Phillips, Rochela, and Rabbi Guten Tag. And I want to particularly thank Joe Johnson, who really initiated this whole committee. So Yasher Koach, thank you all for joining us, and may we all be safe and look out for each other. Have a good night.